Timeline.
What can you tell us about the investigation into the Chicago Police Department? There are so many different civil rights investigations into police departments. What can you tell us about that one? And that involves police police shootings. So the FBI is involved, civil rights. Can you bring us up to date what's going on in Chicago?
We do not have to my understanding, we do not have an open investigation to the Chicago Police Department.
Civil Rights Division. What about any other investigations by the Department of Justice?
We do not have any open investigations into the Chicago Police Department as far as we can tell.
Do you see anything in the...
The investigation is separate from the shooting death of Michael Brown, focusing instead on allegations of misconduct by the police force in relation to searches and treatment of people in police custody. Attorney General Eric Holder spoke about the investigation with reporters during this 35-minute news conference.
Good afternoon. I'm joined today by the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, Molly Moran, and the Director, Ron Davis, of the Community-Oriented Policing Services, or the COPS Office. We are here today to announce the latest steps in the Justice Department's ongoing efforts to address the situation in Ferguson, Missouri, and the surrounding communities. Now, as you know, our federal civil rights investigation into the August 9th shooting death of Michael Brown remains open and remains very active. As I made clear during my visit to Ferguson 2 weeks ago, this investigation will take time. But the American people can have confidence that it will be fair, it will be thorough, and it will be independent. Over the course of that visit, I had the chance to speak with a number of local residents. I heard from them directly about the deep mistrust that has taken hold between law enforcement officials and members of that community. In meetings, as well as in listening sessions, as well as informal conversations, people consistently express concerns stemming from specific alleged incidents, from general policing practices, and from the lack of diversity on the Ferguson police force. These anecdotal accounts underscore the history of mistrust of law enforcement in Ferguson that has received a good deal of attention. As a result of this history, and following an extensive review of documented allegations and other available data, we have determined that there's cause for the Justice Department to open an investigation to determine whether Ferguson police officials have engaged in a pattern or practice of violations of the United States Constitution or federal law. This investigation will be carried out by a team from the Civil Rights Division's Special Litigation Section, some of the same dedicated professionals who have achieved really historic results in ensuring constitutional policing from coast to coast. Over the past 5 years, the Civil Rights Division has prosecuted over 300 individual officers for misconduct. We have opened 20 pattern or practice investigations into police departments across the country. That's more than twice as many as were opened in the previous 5 years. And we're enforcing 14 agreements to reform law enforcement practices at agencies both large and small. With these agreements, we have seen dramatic decreases in excessive uses of force, greater equity in the delivery of police services, including important measures to address bias, and most significantly, increased confidence by communities in their law enforcement agencies. Now, as the brother of a retired police officer, I know that the overwhelming majority of our brave men and women in uniform do their jobs honorably. They do them with integrity and often at great personal risk. The Civil Rights Division's efforts are simply meant to ensure that law enforcement officers in every part of the United States live up to those same high standards of professionalism. In Ferguson, our investigation will assess the police department's use of force, including deadly force. It will analyze stops, searches, and arrests, and it will examine the treatment of individuals detained at Ferguson's city jail, in addition to other potentially discriminatory policing techniques and tactics that have been brought to light. We have met with the mayor, the city manager, and the police chief in Ferguson. They have welcomed this investigation, and they have pledged their complete cooperation. This investigation will be conducted both rigorously and in a timely manner, so we can move forward as expeditiously as possible to restore trust, to rebuild understanding, and to foster cooperation between law enforcement and community members. At the same time, I want to make very clear that as this investigation unfolds and as it evolves, we will follow the facts and the law wherever they may lead. And if at any point we find reason to expand our inquiry to include additional police forces in neighboring jurisdictions, we will not hesitate to do so. In fact, I can also announce today that above and beyond our investigation in Ferguson, we are taking proactive steps to engage the St. Louis County Police Department in what is known as a collaborative reform effort. This partnership is being led by the COPS office, working closely with the St. Louis County officials to conduct a comprehensive assessment. The St. Louis County Police Chief has voluntarily accepted the collaborative reform process and has also asked that the COPS office conduct an after-action report on their response to recent demonstrations. And already, with cooperation of St. Louis County leaders, we have identified priority areas for intensive review and technical assistance, including racial profiling, stops, searches, and frisking, the handling of mass demonstrations by police officials, and law enforcement training, both at the police academy and at the continuing professional level. Because St. Louis County administers training programs for officers throughout the area, including members of the Ferguson Police Department, it makes sense to include the County Police Department as part of our comprehensive approach to confronting the challenges that we've seen in that region. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a stopgap or a short-term solution. It's a long-term strategy founded on community policing that will provide a really detailed roadmap to build trust, to bolster public safety, to ensure accountability, and to change the way that law enforcement leaders make decisions, implement policies, and forge community partnerships. And our track record proves that such efforts to reform policing practices can be tremendously successful. For example, in 2012, the COPS office and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department completed an 8-month review similar to the collaboration that we are launching today with the St. Louis County Police Department. The Las Vegas review resulted in 75 findings and concrete recommendations regarding officer-involved shootings and other use-of-force issues. To date, fully 95% of these recommendations have been adopted, and police agencies in 2 other jurisdictions are going through similar processes as we speak. Now, when I visited Ferguson 2 weeks ago, I promised that the United States Department of Justice would continue to stand with the people there long after the national headlines had faded. Today, with our investigation into the Ferguson Police Department and our reform efforts in St. Louis County, we're taking significant steps towards keeping that promise. As these efforts unfold, my colleagues and I will keep working with the people in Ferguson to ensure that a fair, thorough investigation occurs, to see that dialogue can be translated into concrete action, and to facilitate lasting positive change that brings together public officials, civil rights leaders, and members of the public to bridge gaps and also to build understanding. This won't always be easy, but I know that together we can and we will meet this challenge. Now, before we move to questions, there have been court decisions announced today in 2 separate but very important cases on which I'd like to briefly comment. First, we are pleased that the District Court in New Orleans has found that the largest oil spill in United States history was caused by BP's gross negligence and willful misconduct. The court's findings will ensure that the company is held fully accountable for its recklessness. This case, which was vigorously pursued by the United States' I think, stellar legal team, marks another significant step forward in the Justice Department's continuing efforts to seek justice on behalf of the American people for this disaster. And we are confident that this decision will serve as a strong deterrent to anyone who is tempted to sacrifice safety and the environment in the pursuit of profit. Second, in Ohio, a district court has held that the plaintiffs' challenging the state of Ohio's changes to its in-person early voting rules likely will be able to prove that those changes are in fact unconstitutional. The Justice Department has filed a statement of interest in this case, and today's outcome represents a milestone in our effort to continue to protect voting rights even after the Supreme Court's deeply misguided decision in Shelby County. Well, I'm pleased to note that today's decision and the judge's analysis rests on some of the same legal reasoning that underlies the department's pending challenges to voting measures in Texas as well as in North Carolina under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And as we move forward, my colleagues and I will continue to do everything in our power to aggressively defend access to the ballot box and to ensure that every American can exercise his or her right to participate in the democratic process, unencumbered by unnecessary restrictions that discourage, discriminate, or disenfranchise. And with that, we would be more than happy to take your questions. Pete?
Mr. Attorney General, can you give us a little more texture on why you decided to launch this investigation? Your own conversations there, you talk about review of documented allegations. Give us the universe of what went into this.
We looked at a number of things in our initial and preliminary assessment of whether or not to open this investigation. It included not only discussions that the Attorney General had with residents of Ferguson 2 weeks ago, but also other meetings that the Civil Rights Division and the Community Relations Service and other Justice Department officials have had with residents. We have looked, of course, at public records and other pieces of information that are available to make an assessment that this was indeed an appropriate opening for a pattern and practice investigation. Moreover, the Civil Rights Division met with city leaders in Ferguson yesterday, and they expressed a strong willingness to assist us, and in fact, we're extremely open to this investigation. So we will have cooperation from our local residents.
What public records are we talking about?
There are any number of pieces of information that we looked at, which would have included demographics and public records related to cases that may have been filed by private litigants. There are any number of different things we looked at.
Mr. Attorney General, what about your visit struck you to the point where you felt comfortable to move forward with this investigation? And then secondly, what do you say to police supporters of the police that this investigation is premature and in fact unfair to the police department?
Well, I mean, I would say that, as Molly said, the Assistant Attorney General said, the decision to go ahead was based not only on what I heard while I was out there, which was fairly compelling, and there was a certain continuity in similarities in the kinds of things that I was hearing with regard to traffic stops, revenue raising on the basis of traffic stops that occurred in certain parts of the area. But in addition to that, and in response to the earlier question, there has been a review of documentary evidence indicating that there are problems. And I don't think there's any question that there is a basis to begin a pattern of practice investigation. So that with regard to those who might be concerned that we are somehow being premature, all we're saying at this point is that we're opening an investigation to see whether or not there are, in fact, problems. I think that the fact that we have pledges of local cooperation is an indication that there are issues felt even there at the local level, indicating a need for us to work together to make the situation better. But I want to emphasize, as I said in my prepared remarks, the vast majority of the people who serve the American people in a law enforcement capacity in this country do so honorably, do so quite well. The vast majority of police departments do so, I think, quite well. But where we find problems, it's incumbent upon us, given our statutory responsibilities, to use federal law to make sure that, in fact, occurs.
So what specifically predicated this? I mean, don't you have to, in addition to saying, well, we read a lot of stuff, you said there's no question that there's justification for opening it. But, I mean, it just sounds like when we talked to people and we read some stuff, but what specifically, I mean, there are cases that specifically predicated the opening of this?
Well, you see, you're a little dismissive there, like when you say you read a lot of stuff. I mean, that's kind of what we do,
There's no question, but there's no question to you. But for people who don't know what you've read and don't know what you're looking at, what specifically have you seen that said yes, we have to open this investigation.
Well, I'll let Molly maybe get into more of the specifics, but I mean, there are a variety of documents and materials that are contained in the public record that exist about the percentages of stops that occur that involve certain ethnic groups, and whether those are consistent with the numbers of people who all make up the population. There are a whole variety of things that you all have reported on that I think have given us a good factual basis to proceed in the way that we have announced.
I think it's important to note that these are just preliminary facts that we've gathered. The investigation really is starting today. And so we will now be doing a lot of our evidence gathering in cooperation with the Ferguson Police Department and its city leaders, which will include any number of ways to talk to people and gather evidence directly from the police department. So it is indeed, today is really the first step in the investigation.
If I could ask General Holder, what went into the decision to open a pattern or practice investigation against the Ferguson Police Department, but not to do the same with regard to the county police? And since your COPS office has already been advising the county police for some weeks now, do you see any potential for conflict moving forward with them looking and working with the county police?
So over the last several weeks, we've received a lot of information from residents and other places that caused us to think that indeed there was a potential pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing there. And that in combination with the willingness of the local government to work with us caused us to open the pattern or practice. It's not to say, however, that if we, in the course of our investigation, determine that there are facts that lead us to other jurisdictions nearby, or to the county, we reserve the right to expand our pattern and practice investigation to other jurisdictions, including the county. But at this point, given that the county is training the Ferguson Police Department, we felt that the immediate technical assistance that comes from the collaborative reform that the COPS office provides would be an appropriate first step for the county, and Ron could speak to that.
Yes. So we have started the technical assistance actually a couple weeks ago. And really for us, the collaborative reform process is a form of technical assistance. So we'll build on that. So we have initial consultations, talked about the next steps, how to engage in community policing. The collaborative reform process now will allow us to do in-depth assessments, organizational assessments, identify where there's deficiencies, and come up with recommendations on how to advance community policing for the county. Now, the county voluntarily is going to participate in this because they do provide training for most of the agencies, if not all the agencies, in St. Louis County. So in this way, this effort will not only benefit St. Louis County, but it will be Ferguson and the other 50-plus cities inside the county, because the technical assistance we provide, part of our agreement with St. Louis County Police Chief, will make it open to not only St. Louis County, but all the police agencies, and in my conversation with the Highway Patrol, to their troopers as well. So this part of the equation is really about advancing community policing, constitutional policing through technical assistance, but doing so in a manner that does have an objective, independent assessment, so we know exactly what we're dealing with.
General, how concerned are you that, in regards to the timing of this investigation, that it could inappropriately influence the grand jurors who are looking at evidence in the Michael Brown shooting?
Well, as I said, we are announcing today the beginning of an investigation, and one should not draw a connection between what we are doing today and the matter that the grand jury is in the process of considering, in addition to the fact that we have our own independent investigation going on into the shooting. I think that these are separate matters. I worked with grand juries myself as a prosecutor, and I know that grand juries have the capacity to keep separate those things that should be a part of their considerations. And I'm confident that this will not have an impact on the grand jury process.
Mr. Attorney General, can I ask you, since we're talking about the Civil Rights Division and Civil Rights Investigation, about an investigation into another shooting, a racial incident. There's a big announcement that you made years ago about the investigation into the Trayvon Martin shooting. Have you ever finished that civil rights investigation? Are you ever going to finish that?
That investigation's ongoing, in fact, in anticipation of that question. I asked, give me, as best we can, where do we stand? That matter is ongoing. There are active steps that we are still in the process of taking. There are witnesses who we want to speak to as a result of some recent developments. So that matter is still underway.
Attorney General,
General.
could you tell us when you opened the preliminary inquiry for patterns and practices? What day did that happen? And also, the Ferguson police chief seems to believe that you are investigating as well their hiring practices, but unless I missed it, I don't see that anywhere in your statement. Are you looking at hiring practices?
So today is the day that we are opening the investigation to the Ferguson Police Department.
When did that begin?
That was part of intake over the last several weeks. There isn't a particular day that it started. The pattern and practice investigation is going to cover 4 particular areas. One is going to be the use of force, excessive use of force. The second is going to be the stops, searches, and arrests. We are also going to be looking at the manner in which the Ferguson police treat detainees in the Ferguson City Jail, and we'll also just be looking at discriminatory policing generally.
So hiring won't be part of that?
It is not part of our initial assessment, but of course, we reserve the right to expand the investigation to include that if we find indeed that there are potential issues there.
Well, why wouldn't that be a logical thing, given the complaints in the community that with a community that's 2/3 black, there's only 4 police officers who are black on the police force?
Those numbers don't in and of themselves prove that there is discriminatory policing within a jurisdiction. So it's one of the factors that we'll consider if we indeed need to expand the investigation.
Can you talk about a general timeline?
What can you tell us about the investigation into the Chicago Police Department? There are so many different civil rights investigations into police departments. What can you tell us about that one? And that involves police shootings. So the FBI is involved, civil rights. Can you bring us up to date what's going on in Chicago?
We do not have to my understanding, we do not have an open investigation to the Chicago Police Department.
Civil Rights Division. What about any other investigations by the Department of Justice?
We do not have any open investigations into the Chicago Police Department as far as we can tell.
Did you see anything in the response to the shooting, sir, that would make that part of necessary for a civil rights investigation? I mean, I know there's going to be the cops office review in terms of training and whatnot, but was there anything that that would drag any of the police response to the protests and whatnot into the pattern and practice investigation, or is that not on the table?
Our pattern and practice investigation is going to concentrate in the 4 areas that I outlined, but of course we will examine all the facts that we find, including potentially the response to the protest, although I think it's important to note that the county requested and cops will provide an after-action review of the demonstrations and the response to demonstrations, which Ron can comment on.
General Holder, let me make one clarifying point, if I may, before the next question. Is you mentioned about just the training aspect. So the after action will definitely go more than training. We'll look at it from beginning to end. Responses, that would include talking to officers, community members, leaders. I think will be a little bit more comprehensive than just a training aspect. And clearly along the way, if we see something that needs to be referred, we work very closely with our brother and sister components in the Department of Justice. We will pass information forward as necessary. But this was at the request of the St. Louis County Police Chief.
General Holder.
Well, hold on just a minute. I mean, one thing just to make clear, as I indicated in my remarks, we'll let the facts and the law take us where it is appropriate. And in response to the question that I think maybe Pete had raised about this whole question of diversity, if we have a basis to believe that part of the issues out there, should we find any, is a lack of diversity on the police force. That is something clearly that we will look at, make recommendations with regard to. This is something that we've done in other jurisdictions, and this would not be something that is off the table in our examination in Ferguson.
All right, thank you. We have taking a few more questions. The next one is going to be from Eric Sucker, 18. Thank you.
How long is there sort of an average length? I imagine these are lengthy investigations that will span a couple of years into the future now before a resolution. And in general, when you do a parents and practice, is a consent decree generally sort of the desired end result in each investigation, or are there other outcomes that are?
So the timing can vary depending on the level of cooperation that we get with a jurisdiction. Historically, they have taken months, not weeks, sometimes longer than months. But there's no set deadline, and there's no standard time period. It really does depend a lot on the level of cooperation that we receive from locals. And in this case, at the outset, they have expressed a willingness to be extremely cooperative. In terms of remedies, a consent decree is one remedy that could be achieved, but there are any number of other remedies that also are available at the end of an investigation.
Mr. Attorney General,
General Holder, as you know, there was some discussion about the timing of your visit to Ferguson and the efficacy of that visit. Do you think you would have arrived, the department would have arrived this quickly to this decision without that visit?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's certainly, I think the trip was invaluable from my own perspective to have obtained in a very personal way a sense of what the situation was there by interacting with residents of Ferguson, by speaking to the investigators who were involved in the ongoing investigation. I think that certainly, at least for me, sharpened my own sense of what was going on there and the potential need for that which we are announcing today. So I think that that visit certainly influenced the decision that we made today and are announcing today.
All right, thank you. We're going to take the next question from Huffington Post.
Yes, and on your, in your discussions with residents around Ferguson, I'm sure one thing that you've heard is that, there are a lot of different jurisdictions around that area. You walk a couple of blocks up from where Michael Brown was shot, and suddenly you're in Delwood. There are a lot of different jurisdictions. So do you think that it's a likely outcome of this, that we're going to end up with investigations into other municipalities in that area?
I'm not sure I'd say likely, but I think it's there's a certain, I feel pretty certain that we will be doing an examination in some form or fashion with regard to those other police forces. That's certainly a part of what cops will be doing. Whether or not the pattern of practice thing actually expands into those other jurisdictions, we'll just have to see. But there's no question that I think in some fashion we'll be interacting with and looking at what those other police departments are doing.
Do you think the system, the way it's set up, it makes sense with having so many different municipalities in that area? Do you think that the system, the way it's set up, makes sense having so many municipalities in that area? Do you think ultimately there could be the potential for a larger police force united under one shield?
Well, I mean, we'll have to see what our examination uncovers and what kinds of recommendations we're going to make. And I'm sure that, given the interest that those people in the local scene have expressed, those are the kinds of questions I would assume that they're asking themselves as well.
Mr. Attorney General, we had the brutal killing of another American journalist this week. We're 1 week out from the 9/11 anniversary. With all the activity in Syria, foreign fighters, questions about Al-Qaeda, Yemen bomb makers, how would you assess the current threat environment leading up to 9/11?
Well, we're not in possession of any specific, credible information that would evidence a threat to the homeland. But we are also cognizant of the situation as it exists in the Middle East now. Threats that have been made and that our allies, for instance in the UK, are dealing with, and we are very sensitive to that, and to the extent that we find anything, we will take the appropriate action. But we're not in possession, at least at this point, of any specific credible threats to the homeland.
Okay, we have one more question.
You mentioned voting rights. Do you have an indication of how many Americans could be denied the right to vote come the midterm elections because of the changes across America?
I mean, I think that's hard to quantify, but in light of the fact that one of the, the primary reason for these new voting, what I would call voting restrictions to be put in place is this notion of voter fraud, given the fact that there's been really no, I think, credible indication that we're dealing with that kind of problem. The question really becomes why put these measures in place. We are not opposed to all kinds of voter identification, and that's this notion that somehow or other people just walk up and vote. No, it's a question of making sure that the voting identification provisions that are in place don't discriminate, don't inhibit people's ability to do that which is most fundamental to this country. So it's hard, but it's hard to quantify exactly, what the numbers are. But I think we have certainly shown through cases that we have brought and won against Texas here in the district, for instance, before the Shelby decision, that these kinds of measures have a negative impact on the ability of certain communities to cast ballots.
All right, thank you.
We can take a couple.
The verdict in the former Virginia Governor Barbadaro trial is in. He's been found guilty of multiple counts. Do you have any reaction, comment, anything to share with us?
No, I only heard about the fact that there was a verdict as we were coming in. I only found out there was a guilty verdict on the basis of what you have said. It was a case I thought was well tried by the people in the Eastern District of Virginia, and a case that was appropriately brought. That's all I'm saying.
Last
In
question.
regards to ISIS, obviously there's a lot of concern about Americans going over there to join the fight in Syria and Iraq. How confident are you that the U.S. knows the identities of the Americans who have made it over there and those who have come back to the U.S.?
Our FBI uses a variety of techniques to determine who is here and interested in going to the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, other places. We also use a variety of techniques working with the intelligence community and our allies to identify people who are there. Our best estimate now is that there are about 12,000 foreign fighters there, about 1,000 Europeans, maybe as many as 100 Americans or so. And I think that we have a pretty good handle on who is there, and also a pretty good handle on who potentially might want to go there. We have brought a number of prosecutions. We have a number of ongoing investigations in that regard. And we're doing everything that we can to ensure that anybody who is intent on supporting ISIL, either from the homeland or to go to the Middle East and potentially to come back and do harm to our country, is monitored, is held accountable, and is prevented from doing so.
Thank you.
What's being done to investigate the beheadings? Can you describe what's being done regarding these two journalists that were executed by ISIS? Can you give us a sense of what the U.S. government response is that's underway? Is it FBI? Is it broader than FBI? What is happening on that? And what can be done given the chaotic situation over there to find the folks and bring them to justice?
Well, there is an ongoing FBI investigation that had been begun when these journalists were hostages, and so now that has been transformed. Those investigations have obviously been transformed into homicide investigations, but we're working with the intelligence community here in the United States. We're working with our allies to try to determine who the individuals were who we saw on those tapes. I'm confident that we're going to be able to make identifications in that regard, and then people who were involved in those incidents and who are presently engaged in holding Americans or citizens of our allied nations are going to be held accountable. And when I say held accountable, I want to be very clear. I speak now as a member of the national security team, not strictly as the Attorney General. We will take those steps, legal steps that we can, but we will use all American power that we can to hold people accountable. That means using the resources from the Department of Defense as well as the Department of Justice.
Mr. Attorney General, can I just ask one last question? Since you're here so nicely talking to us journalists, I just want to ask you about another fellow journalist of ours, James Risen. Are you continuing to prosecute that case? You said you don't want a journalist to go into jail as long as you're Attorney General. Why not drop that case?
Well, I don't want to comment too much on what is a pending case, but I will say that I think that case was appropriately charged. It is a case that we intend to see through to the end, and we will deal with the issue that you have raised, in an appropriate way, and consistent with what I have said on a number of occasions in which you just quoted. Okay.
Back to Ferguson for just a second. We've had the Trayvon Martin shooting. We've had this incident in Ferguson. As you look over your tenure and the state of policing in the United States, give us your sense of what you think about race and policing in this country. Where do we need to go on that issue?
Well, I think that there is the need for, and we always say this, I've said this starting in 2009, and I think maybe, I guess in the Great Hall, talked about the need for a conversation in this country about race. I think there is still that need, but I think we need to go beyond that. And we need to come up with concrete ways in which we're going to move this country forward and deal with these issues. Understand that there are communities who feel discriminated against. There are bases for that sense of alienation. And we have to come up with concrete ways in which we're going to deal with that. And, law enforcement is just a part of the larger society. Now, there are flashpoints that come up every now and again that I think point to problems that we have to deal with. But again, I want to make clear that I think the vast majority of people who are in law enforcement, vast majority of police departments do their job in a way that we would expect. But to the extent that there are problems, I think we as a society need to have the guts to say, we're going to identify this as a problem. This is a deficiency in our country, and we're going to make it better. That's what makes this country exceptional. The fact that we recognize issues, deal with them, and move this country closer to the ideals that founded America in the first place.
All right, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.